Hello, I'm Ron Fox for Get Woodworking, and we're going to carry on talking about routers and some of the things you can do with them. Now, I'm a great believer in making very simple work aids. Call them jigs if you like, but some of them are so simple it's hardly worth calling them a jig. People tend to be put off a bit at the thought of making jigs, as if you've got to be a pattern maker or something like that. Well, there's no doubt that if you are a pattern maker you can make some pretty good jigs, but you don't really have to have that level of skill. What you do need is a few little work aids, which I think of as almost my machine tools, which you use in turn to make other simple things, which as we go down the path lead to other things again. This is a subject that often puts people off and their eyes glaze over when you mention the dreaded word jig. But it's quite simple if you set about it in the right way. And as far as I'm concerned, the right way is to have some very, very simple devices which enable you to make something a little more complicated, which in turn enable you to make something further down the road, so that we start off with something basic and we build up, and eventually we can acquire quite a few work aids which in my opinion do as much to bring your router to life as all the vast array of cutters and commercial jigs and templates that are available to us. And of course they don't cost very much either. You're talking about a little bit of MDF screwed or glued to a bit of batten. So take the one I've got in my hand, for example. This is a basic hinge jig that I made to set a 3-inch butt hinge into the edge of a door. Let me take a piece of timber that's going to stand in as my door edge, take the hinge that I made the jig to set. You can see that it works, and all we do is to clamp our jig to the door edge. We take a guide bush and a straight cutter, and I mark my jig with the diameter of the guide bush and the diameter of the cutter. Never mind how we decide those, we're making the jig at the moment. And we cut the recess for the hinge. Very simple, very useful. Often the simplest things are the most useful and the ones that get used the most. So there's the jig, nothing clever about it. A clean cut for the recess, a slot and a counter slot in it so that this becomes adjustable for different thicknesses of door. Couple of bits projecting so you can clamp it to the door. That's all there is to it, and we're going to see how we make it. Something a bit more complicated, which I had in the woodworker soon after the Alexandra Palace show, not this year but last year, is my guide bush based housing and slotting jig. But again, the cuts are all fairly straightforward. There's nothing complicated except that they must be accurate. So what do we do to get them accurate? Well, my secret weapon consists of some straight edges and a flush trimming cutter with the bearing over the top of the cutter. Now these cutters go under different names from different suppliers. These particular ones come from Weldon cutters, where they are called template trim cutters. They all have in common the fact that they have a bearing over the cutter. The bearing is exactly flush with the blades of the cutter. And if you were to run that bearing along a straight edge, or for that matter any shaped edge, you would cut your workpiece to the exact shape and size of the template or jig that you were running the bearing against. Now I use these most of the time with straight edges, and I'll just show you how it works. Here is my first of what I call my machine tool work aids. A simple straight edge. They can be of whatever size and thickness is appropriate for the job. These I use for most of my basic jigs. You might also want to use a longer one, for example, for trimming the edge of a board. And the way they work is very simple. If I took a board that you can see that has been run down the bandsaw. Now I could take my plane or run it over my planer thicknesser to trim the edge. If you haven't got a planer thicknesser, if your planing skills are not all that they might be, there's a very easy way of getting a perfect edge on that board. A straight edge and one of these cutters. What you do is you take the straight edge with some double-sided tape, tape the straight edge to the line of the cut that you want, put your template trim cutter in your router. This one is on a 1/4 inch shank, but it could easily be a 1/2 inch shank. It's got a length that is more than adequate for the thickness of the board. With the router on the top here, you run the bearing along the edge of the straight edge, and the blades, which cut exactly flush to the bearing, will trim that board edge exactly square and exactly straight to the line of your straight edge. This is a way of planing the edge of a board if you're producing boards that you want to join to make a tabletop, for example. But there's a lot more to it than that, and I use them more often for making smaller type of jigs. So going back to our hinge jig, let me show you the stages in getting from a piece of MDF to the finished jig, which in turn will give us the finished socket for the 3-inch butt hinge.